The ocean sparkled under the Caribbean sun as the cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas sailed smoothly through the waves. Laughter echoed from the decks, music played late into the night, and families like the Bradleys soaked in the luxury of a dream vacation. But beneath this glamorous surface, something dark was brewing. On the morning of March 24, 1998, Amy Lynn Bradley vanished without a trace. No scream, no struggle, no goodbye. Just an empty cabin and an ocean that kept its secrets. Did Amy walk away on her own, or was she taken into the shadows? This isn't just the story of a missing girl, it's a chilling whisper from the depths of silence. A mystery wrapped in fear and unanswered questions. You're watching Chronicles Confidential, where we uncover the truths about crimes the world tries to forget and the powers try to hide. The first rays of the Caribbean sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue over the vast ocean. It was early morning on March 24, 1998. Passengers were still asleep, the ship quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the engine cutting through the sea. Somewhere on the ninth deck, Amy Lynn Bradley stood on the private balcony of her family's stateroom. She had been seen just moments earlier by her brother Brad. They had returned from a late-night party on the ship where they had danced, laughed, and taken photos with other passengers and even some of the crew. Around 5:30 a.m., Brad woke briefly to see Amy sitting on the balcony. She seemed calm, perhaps lost in thought, gazing at the endless horizon. It was the last time anyone would ever see her. At 6:00 a.m., when their father Ron woke up, Amy was gone. Her shoes were still in the room. Her ID, cigarettes, and even her room key had been left behind. But Amy was nowhere to be found. The ship was massive, with over 2,000 people on board, yet no one could account for her movements in that 30-minute window. The family immediately reported her missing to ship authorities, but their concerns were brushed off. They were told she might have gone to the breakfast area or stepped out for some air. Security was not alerted. The ship kept moving, and within hours the massive vessel docked in Curaçao, allowing thousands of passengers to disembark without any thorough search or lockdown. Was Amy's disappearance a tragic accident? Did she fall overboard in a moment of dizziness or distress? Or was there something more sinister at play? From the very first moment she went missing, nothing added up. The timeline was too tight. Her behavior gave no indication of depression or suicidal thoughts. And most importantly, Amy was terrified of open water. She couldn't have just walked to the edge and jumped. Her disappearance in those silent morning minutes wasn't just a mystery. It was the beginning of a nightmare her family would never wake up from. The night before Amy disappeared was filled with music, laughter, and celebration. It was a typical cruise evening. Passengers gathered at the ship's nightclub, dancing under neon lights, drinks in hand, and worries left behind on the mainland. Amy, a vibrant 23-year-old with a striking presence, was enjoying herself. Alongside her brother Brad, she mingled with other guests and even struck up conversations with members of the ship's band, Blue Orchid. Photos taken that night showed Amy smiling, relaxed, seemingly safe. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing her dancing late into the night. One crew member in particular, a man named Yellow, known for being friendly with many female passengers, was seen with Amy on several occasions throughout the evening. According to Brad, the two had shared a few dances, but nothing seemed off. There was no argument, no visible discomfort. Everything appeared normal, until it wasn't. At around 3:45 a.m., Amy and Brad returned to their cabin. They chatted briefly before Brad went to bed, while Amy remained awake. By 5:30 a.m., she was seen one last time on the balcony. By 6 a.m., she had vanished. But in an age when cruise ships were equipped with surveillance cameras across all major areas, one haunting question remains. Where was the footage? The ship's security team claimed that no video showed Amy leaving the room, walking down the corridors, or stepping onto any public deck. Not a single frame captured her movements after that night. Either the cameras were not functioning, or someone made sure the footage would never be found. Even more alarming, The crew hesitated to release any footage or initiate a proper investigation. They refused to halt disembarkation or announce a missing person on board. Instead, they told the family to wait. Maybe she had gone ashore early. But Amy's shoes were still in the room, her belongings untouched. She wasn't the type to vanish without a word. It was as if the ship had swallowed her whole, as if the laughter of the night before had been the final echo of her presence. And as the morning sun rose, the cameras, the silent witnesses, had nothing to say. Iva Bradley couldn't sleep that night. While the rest of the ship partied or lay silently in their cabins, she tossed and turned in her bed, haunted by a sense of unease she couldn't explain. There was no sound, no scream, no thud, nothing that should have alarmed her, but something in the pit of her stomach whispered that something was wrong. As a mother, Iva had always shared a deep emotional bond with Amy. They weren't just mother and daughter, they were best friends. And that night, as the hours passed and the ocean rocked the ship gently, Iva felt something shift, something intangible, a tension in the air, a coldness that wrapped around her heart like a warning. At one point, she even sat up in bed, glancing toward the balcony where she had seen Amy earlier. But it was dark, and all she could see was the faint outline of waves dancing under moonlight. She tried to convince herself it was just anxiety, just another mother worrying too much. She laid back down, still restless, still uneasy. When she finally drifted off to sleep, it wasn't for long. The sunrise woke her early, casting warm light into the room. She turned over, expecting to see Amy either asleep or still on the balcony. But the chair was empty. The balcony door was slightly open, swaying gently with the sea breeze, and Amy was gone. The panic that hit her was instant. She rushed through the room, checking the bathroom, opening the closet, calling her name. Nothing. It was as if Amy had evaporated into the air. Iva's voice cracked as she woke Ron and Brad. They all knew something was wrong. Amy wasn't the kind to wander off. She was cautious, especially on water. She would have never left without her shoes, her cigarettes, her room key. And yet her belongings lay untouched, silent proof that whatever happened to her wasn't voluntary. Later, Iva would say that she felt Amy's absence before she even opened her eyes, that a part of her already knew. A mother's instinct is rarely wrong. That night, as Amy walked into whatever fate awaited her, Iva's soul felt the shift, because when a daughter's voice is silenced, a mother's heart never stops screaming. The cabin door was slightly ajar, not wide open, just enough to let the cool morning air slip inside. To most, it might have seemed harmless, but to Amy's parents, it was the first chilling clue that something wasn't right. Amy was known to be cautious. She wouldn't have left the room without telling someone. She wouldn't have wandered the ship barefoot, and she certainly wouldn't have left the door open, not when she was always alert and aware of her surroundings. Ron Bradley, Amy's father, had woken up just after 6 a.m. He immediately noticed her absence, then saw the door, not fully closed, not latched. It was as if someone had left in a hurry, or someone had entered without making a sound. The questions started to flood in. If Amy had stepped out for fresh air, why not close the door behind her? Why leave her shoes, cigarettes, and room key behind? If she intended to return, what interrupted her in that brief moment? One theory suggests Amy might have been lured out, maybe by someone she had met the night before, someone she trusted enough to follow. Perhaps it was a casual walk on the deck that turned into something far more sinister. Another possibility? Someone entered the room while everyone slept, silently, precisely, targeted. There were no signs of struggle, no noise had disturbed the family. And yet, the open door told a story of quiet motion, of something or someone slipping in or out undetected. Some crew members claimed to have seen Amy later that morning in the ship's elevators, but those sightings were vague, unconfirmed, and inconsistent. Without security footage, without solid leads, the open door became more than just a physical detail. It became a symbol of vulnerability. Did Amy open that door willingly, unaware it would be the last step she ever took on her own? Or did someone else push it open, while darkness and silence covered their tracks? In the world of cruise ships, with thousands of passengers and open access to endless exits, one unlocked door was all it took to make a young woman vanish forever. From the moment Amy's disappearance was reported, the crew's response raised eyebrows and suspicion. Ron and Iva Bradley pleaded with ship authorities to make an announcement over the intercom. Just a simple call asking if anyone had seen their daughter. But the request was denied. The ship's officers claimed it was too early and that Amy was probably exploring the ship. They insisted it was against policy to alarm passengers. Then came the refusal to stop disembarkation. Despite the growing panic of the Bradley family, the ship docked in Curacao just hours later, and thousands of passengers were allowed to leave freely, without a full search, without questioning, without hesitation. Any chance of finding Amy on board or ensuring she wasn't taken off the ship was lost in those crucial moments. Even worse, when the family begged to see surveillance footage, they were met with resistance. The crew said they'd look into it, but no footage was ever released publicly. Not a single image of Amy from the time she was last seen to the moment the ship docked. It was as if the cameras had gone blind, or someone had turned their eyes away on purpose. The cruise line's attitude became colder with each passing hour. Staff members were instructed not to speak with the family. The captain kept his distance. Any question about Amy's interactions with crew members, especially the band member she was seen with, was met with vague answers or complete silence. Later, the Bradleys would learn that cruise ships are registered under foreign flags, allowing them to operate under loose jurisdiction. In Amy's case, that meant no FBI, no immediate U.S. investigation, no strict accountability. The cruise company conducted its own internal investigation, which amounted to a few interviews and inconclusive statements. Meanwhile, precious time was slipping away. Ron recalled walking past crew members who looked away when he approached. Iva noticed whispers that stopped the moment she entered a room. There was an unspoken wall forming between the family and those who were supposed to help. Were they protecting their image, avoiding liability, or hiding something darker? In the face of a missing daughter, the Bradleys expected compassion. What they got instead was cold detachment, institutional silence, and a growing suspicion that the people they trusted to keep them safe were either incompetent or complicit. Months after Amy's disappearance, hope reemerged in the most unexpected way. A Canadian tourist visiting a beach in Curacao approached the Bradleys with a chilling story. She claimed to have seen a young woman who looked exactly like Amy, same eyes, same tattoos, same posture, being escorted by two men on the island. The woman seemed distressed, constantly glancing around, as if searching for help. At one moment, when the men were distracted, she leaned toward the tourist and whispered urgently, "My name is Amy. Help me." The tourist froze, unsure whether it was real or imagined. By the time she gathered the courage to act, the men had whisked the girl away. They vanished into the crowd, leaving behind nothing but that desperate plea. This wasn't the first sighting, but it was the first with such terrifying detail. Amy had distinct tattoos: a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her shoulder, a sun on her lower back, a Chinese symbol on her right ankle, and a lizard on her navel. The woman on the beach had them all. The resemblance was uncanny. The fear was real. The Bradleys were devastated. If this sighting was true, Amy hadn't fallen overboard. She hadn't run away. She had been taken and was still alive. Local authorities were notified, but once again, no official action followed. No search parties, no media alerts. The cruise line distanced itself further, and U.S. agencies lacked jurisdiction in a foreign territory. It was as if Amy's existence, her possible cry for help, was drowned out by red tape and international silence. This sighting sparked a haunting theory that Amy had been abducted and forced into a human trafficking ring, that she was being moved between locations, watched, controlled, stripped of identity, but not of hope. For Iva and Ron, the thought of Amy alive but trapped somewhere, calling out through strangers, was unbearable. They traveled to Curacao, searching every corner, asking questions no one wanted to answer. But once again, the trail went cold. And yet, that whisper on the beach would never leave them. "My name is Amy. "Help me." It was more than a sentence, it was a lifeline, a glimpse into the darkness and a mother's worst fear made real. The deeper investigators and the Bradley family dug, the more sinister the possibilities became. With no body, no confirmed evidence of death, and multiple credible sightings across the Caribbean, one terrifying theory began to take hold. Amy Lynn Bradley had been abducted into a human trafficking network. It sounded unthinkable at first. A young American woman kidnapped from a cruise ship, one of the most heavily monitored and secure vacation environments, was now believed to be trapped in a dark underworld of exploitation. But piece by piece, the theory began to make chilling sense. Amy had the exact profile traffickers often look for: young, healthy, attractive, and traveling outside of her home country. She also had unique tattoos which, ironically, made her both easier to identify and more valuable to those who sought to control her. Traffickers often target women in transit, especially in locations with weak jurisdiction and high tourist turnover. A cruise ship offered the perfect setting: a floating city with endless anonymity, multiple ports, and minimal oversight. Experts in human trafficking later admitted that the Caribbean had long been a known route for moving kidnapped women into underground markets. And Amy's last known location, Curaçao, was one of several islands where trafficking rings had previously operated. What made the theory even more plausible were the multiple sightings of Amy over the years, each one echoing the same pattern. A woman matching her description, often in the company of controlling men, looking frightened, whispering for help, then disappearing before authorities could intervene. In 2005, a member of the U.S. Navy claimed he had visited a brothel in Curaçao where an American woman approached him and begged for help, telling him her name was Amy Bradley. She said she had been held against her will for years. The sailor reported the encounter after returning to base. But by the time authorities investigated, the brothel had mysteriously burned down. For the Bradley family, these stories weren't mere speculation. They were horrifying glimpses into the possibility that Amy was alive, but imprisoned in a living nightmare. The idea that she might have been trafficked, drugged, and sold repeatedly, while the world carried on, was more painful than the idea of death. And yet, with every new lead came the same pattern: no follow-through, no international cooperation, no rescue. Was the world too blind or too indifferent to save her? Human trafficking isn't a fantasy. It's real. It's hidden in plain sight. And in Amy's case, it may be the answer that no one wanted to believe, but the only one that fits the darkness swallowing her story. Years had passed since Amy vanished, and the pain hadn't dulled. But then, out of nowhere, the Bradley family received a phone call that reignited every hope and every fear. A man claiming to be a former U.S. Navy SEAL reached out to a private investigator working with the Bradleys. His message was short, but earth-shattering. He claimed he had encountered a woman in a Caribbean brothel who had identified herself as Amy Lynn Bradley. She was alive, he said, desperate, terrified. She begged him to help her, told him she was being held against her will, and shared details about her past that no stranger could possibly know. According to him, Amy described her hometown in Virginia. She talked about her brother Brad, even mentioned the family dog's name from childhood. She gave facts about her life that were never made public, details that had never appeared in news reports or interviews. Whoever this woman was, she knew everything Amy would know. The caller didn't just give hope, he gave a plan. He offered to extract her. He claimed he could coordinate a rescue operation, but he needed funds and time to prepare. The Bradleys, desperate and emotionally exhausted, agreed. They wired money, waited with bated breath, and prepared for the moment they'd finally see their daughter again. But that moment never came. The man vanished, disconnected his phone, disappeared without a trace. The operation never happened, and Amy, if she was really there, was lost once more. To this day, no one knows if the call was real. Was the man telling the truth? Did he get scared off? Or was it all a scam? But the specificity of what he said haunted the Bradleys. He knew things he shouldn't have. He mentioned details that weren't in the media, and the tone in his voice, the urgency, sounded like someone who had truly seen a woman broken by years of captivity. Was Amy reaching out through someone brave enough to listen? Or was it just another cruel twist in a case already full of them? That single call, filled with the echo of Amy's life, was like hearing her voice from a tunnel too dark to follow. It left behind more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. The mystery hadn't ended. It had only deepened. When the Bradleys finally returned to the United States, they expected answers. They had spoken to witnesses, followed leads, and now hoped that the FBI, the world's most advanced investigative agency, would uncover the truth. But what followed was a maze of bureaucracy, miscommunication, and missed opportunities that left the family more frustrated than ever. The FBI did open a case. Agents interviewed the crew of the Rhapsody of the Seas, combed through the ship's limited surveillance footage, and questioned witnesses. But from the start, there were problems. The ship had docked in Curacao before the investigation even began, giving potential suspects and evidence time to disappear. Crucial hours had been lost, time that in a missing person case often means everything. When the Bradleys asked to see the surveillance footage themselves, they were denied. The cruise line claimed the tapes showed nothing relevant, and the FBI accepted that. No footage of Amy leaving her room, no images of her on deck, no trace of her after 5:30 a.m. It was as if the ship itself had erased her. The agents focused on interviews, but even those were incomplete. Some crew members had already left the ship and returned to their home countries. Others were uncooperative. The band member Amy was seen dancing with Yellow, was interviewed but never fully investigated. No lie detector tests, no forensic searches, no follow-up. As the years passed, the case became colder. The FBI shared very little with the family. Files were sealed. Tips were kept confidential. And despite the Bradleys' relentless push for transparency, the agency gave them few updates. Whenever a new lead surfaced, it felt like the same pattern repeated. A flurry of hope followed by silence. In 2010, a Freedom of Information Act request revealed that the FBI had gathered over 1,500 pages on Amy's case, but large portions were redacted. Key names, timelines, and findings were blacked out. The Bradleys weren't just left in the dark, they were kept there. For Iva and Ron, the pain of not knowing was magnified by the sense that the very institutions meant to protect them were closing doors instead of opening them. They didn't need theories, they needed action, but all they got was delay, deflection, and denial. Why were certain files sealed? Why were leads allowed to go cold? Why did the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world seem so powerless or unwilling to find one missing girl? Each unanswered question became its own kind of torment, and every closed file felt like another lock on the truth. It was the year 2005 when the Bradley family received yet another jarring shock, this time in the form of a photograph. A Navy officer, while casually browsing an adult website notorious for illegal content, stumbled upon something that froze him in place. Among the images of exploited women was a series titled simply Jazz. In those pictures, one woman stood out, young, pale, dark-eyed, with a hollow, terrified expression etched into her face. Her body language screamed discomfort. Her eyes pleaded without words. But what haunted the officer most was her face. He knew that face. He had seen Amy Lynn Bradley's image in a news report years ago and immediately recognized the striking resemblance. The tattoos, the facial features, the posture, it all aligned. He contacted the Bradleys immediately. When Iva and Ron saw the photos, their reaction was visceral. Iva collapsed to her knees. Ron turned away in silence. There was no doubt in their minds. This was Amy. Older, thinner, worn down by years of fear, but it was her. The woman in the photos didn't appear to be posing by choice. Her shoulders were tense, her expression vacant. She wasn't wearing makeup or smiling seductively like the others. She looked trapped. And worse, she looked like someone who had been told to cooperate or suffer the consequences. The FBI was alerted. A formal request was made to trace the origin of the photos and identify the website's operators. But the internet was vast, encrypted, and full of loopholes. The photos were taken down within days, the website vanished, and the woman called Jazz disappeared with it. No trace was left, no IP address, no lead, no explanation. To outsiders, it could be brushed off as a mistaken identity. But to Amy's family, who knew every inch of her face, who had memorized her tattoos, who had stared at her childhood photos in grief for years, there was no question. That image wasn't just a coincidence. It was a scream for help, frozen in pixels. Was Amy being moved through underground networks, sold into sexual slavery? Was she renamed, repackaged, and presented to the world as someone else? The possibility tore at the family's soul. That their daughter was alive, barely, and the world had seen her suffering and clicked away. The internet had offered a glimpse into the hell she might be living in. But once again, the trail went dark. And Amy, if she was ever truly there, was swallowed by silence once more. From the beginning, Brad Bradley had been seen as a key witness. After all, he was the last known person to see Amy alive. They had returned to the cabin together around 3:45 a.m. after a night of dancing and celebration. Brad recalled that Amy had stayed up sitting on the balcony while he went to sleep. When he woke around 6 a.m., she was gone. That timeline, simple on the surface, would become a subject of endless scrutiny. As the investigation dragged on and answers remained scarce, some began to look closer at Brad, not as a grieving brother, but as a potential piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. Why didn't he wake up during her disappearance? The room was small. The door was slightly open. The sea breeze was enough to stir anyone, yet Brad claimed to have heard nothing, seen nothing, not even a shadow. Over time, interviews with Brad began to reveal minor inconsistencies, tiny gaps in memory, shifts in how he described Amy's mood, their conversation, or her state of mind that night. At first, these were dismissed as the natural effects of trauma, but to some investigators, they hinted at something deeper. Perhaps not guilt, but fear. Perhaps Brad knew something and chose not to say it. One theory suggested that Amy might have told her brother something that night, something about someone on the ship, someone she was afraid of, and that Brad, thinking it was nothing serious, chose to ignore it. That choice, however innocent, may have cost her everything. Another darker theory implied that Brad may have witnessed something, heard a sound, saw a figure that didn't make sense at the time, and that he buried it out of fear or denial. Years later, as the case became a media storm, Brad remained relatively quiet, giving few interviews and rarely revisiting the events of that night. Was it survivor's guilt, or something more? The Bradley family has always maintained unity. They have never once accused Brad of wrongdoing, but outsiders questioned the dynamic, the silence, the absence of further leads, and in a case so filled with secrets, even silence can sound like a scream. To this day, no evidence ties Brad to Amy's disappearance. No proof, no confession, no slip of the tongue. But the question lingers like fog over calm water. Did he miss something that could have saved her? Or is he the last person on Earth who knows exactly what happened that night and can't bear to speak it out loud? In the days and weeks following Amy's disappearance, the memories shared by those closest to her became the only pieces left to hold on to. Her parents clung to every word, every glance, every moment they could recall from that vacation. Brad tried to replay the night in his head over and over, hoping to catch something he missed. Friends were contacted, former classmates, even old boyfriends. All were asked the same questions. Had Amy ever mentioned running away? Did she seem troubled? Was there anything at all that might explain her sudden disappearance? In those early interviews, the answers were clear. No, she wasn't depressed. No, she didn't seem scared. No, she would never vanish on her own. But as time went on, those clear memories began to blur. Years passed. Retellings changed. Some friends remembered Amy being a little quiet before the cruise. Others recalled her saying she wasn't excited about the trip. Someone else suggested she had a fight with a boyfriend back home. Small details, perhaps meaningless, suddenly began to take on weight. What had once been a confident consensus that Amy had been happy and grounded started to shift under the pressure of time, trauma, and speculation. Even within the family, subtle changes crept in. Ron began to question whether she had been more anxious than she let on. Iva sometimes wondered if Amy had hidden something from her, some fear, some warning. Brad admitted that he had been drinking the night of the party and couldn't remember everything clearly. Details he once gave with certainty became softer, less sure. Memories, no matter how vivid, are fragile things. They bend, they fade, they reshape themselves around grief and guilt. And for the Bradleys, this distortion became its own form of torture. They needed certainty, but the more time passed, the less certain anyone was of anything. Had Amy confided in someone before the cruise? Did she fear someone on board? Was there a hint in her words, her expressions, her silence? Or were these just the dreams of people trying to rewrite the past, desperate to find meaning in chaos? Each fading memory became a ghost, soft, silent, and untrustworthy. And as the years wore on, the line between fact and feeling blurred. In the absence of evidence, even the clearest truths became clouded. And the only thing more painful than not knowing was remembering and still finding nothing. At the heart of Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance lies not just a personal tragedy, but the shadow of a much larger machine, one driven by money, reputation, and silence. Royal Caribbean International, the company that operated the Rhapsody of the Seas, was quick to offer sympathy. They expressed concern, pledged cooperation, and issued standard statements about their commitment to passenger safety. But behind closed doors, a different picture was emerging. Almost immediately after Amy vanished, the cruise line's priority became clear: protect the brand. The Bradleys were urged not to speak to the media. A company representative even flew to their home shortly after the disappearance, not to provide updates or assistance, but to ask them to remain quiet until internal reviews were complete. The family, still in shock, agreed temporarily. But time revealed that what was being called an internal investigation was little more than a PR maneuver. No independent investigators were brought in. No thorough forensic sweep of the ship was conducted. Crew members were allowed to return home without intense questioning. Key individuals, especially those who had spent time with Amy that night, were never properly interrogated. Why? Because a cruise ship is not just a vessel, it's a business. A floating city built on customer trust, luxury branding, and financial bottom lines. One missing passenger, especially under suspicious circumstances, was bad for business. Too many questions could scare potential customers. Too much media attention could disrupt shareholder confidence. So, the story was managed. The company released limited information. They framed Amy's disappearance as a probable accident or personal decision. When the Bradleys demanded access to security footage and logs, they were stalled. Legal barriers were raised. International maritime laws were cited. Doors were shut. One by one, whispers began to circulate that the cruise industry in general had a history of minimizing incidents at sea. Crimes, assaults, and disappearances were often underreported, hidden under the jurisdictional loopholes of flags of convenience and foreign registration. Ships like Rhapsody of the Seas were governed by the laws of countries far removed from the victims who traveled aboard them. In Amy's case, this meant no clear jurisdiction. No centralized investigation. No urgency. It also meant that if someone on board had harmed her, whether a crew member, a passenger, or someone linked to something darker, there would be little accountability. The Bradleys weren't just fighting for their daughter. They were fighting against a system designed to suppress stories like hers. A system where profit mattered more than truth. Where contracts protected corporations, not people. Where a grieving family could be locked out of the very investigation that might bring them answers. One small town in Virginia had sent their daughter on a cruise. She never came back. And somewhere, within boardrooms and legal files, her story was buried under silence, settlements, and sealed reports. A single girl went missing, but the cover-up was massive, and the silence wasn't just accidental, it was corporate. For over 2 decades, The Bradley family lived in the shadow of one unbearable truth. Amy was gone, and no one, not law enforcement, not governments, not corporations, was willing to bring her back. Ron, Iva, and Brad didn't just mourn her, they fought for her. They appeared on national television. They traveled to the Caribbean multiple times, chasing every whisper, every shadow of a lead. They spent their life savings hiring private investigators, forensic analysts, and international consultants. They knocked on embassy doors, testified before Congress, and pleaded with anyone who would listen. But the doors kept closing. Authorities told them their hands were tied. Jurisdictions clashed. One agency blamed another. Promises were made, then broken. Files were opened, then sealed. Time passed, and with it, public interest faded. Amy's face, once on posters and news segments, began to disappear from the spotlight, but not from her family's hearts. Iva became a mother with a mission. Every morning she woke up hoping for news, and every night she closed her eyes replaying Amy's voice in her mind. Ron carried the weight in silence, becoming a quiet warrior for the truth. Brad withdrew from the world, haunted by guilt and grief, his life split in half by the night his sister vanished. They sacrificed everything, privacy, peace, financial stability, to keep Amy's story alive. Yet every effort seemed to hit the same wall. Silence. Bureaucratic silence, legal silence, the kind that doesn't just hide answers. It destroys hope. Amy's case was never officially solved. No body was found, no arrest was made, no confession surfaced. And still, the Bradleys endured. Because to them, giving up meant leaving Amy behind forever, and they couldn't do that, not as long as there was even the faintest chance she was still out there. But that fight came at a cost. The cost was sleep. The cost was joy. The cost was the very life they once knew, now buried beneath unanswered questions and haunting memories. The cost was learning how cruel silence can be, not just the absence of words, but the deliberate withholding of truth. And in that silence, the Bradleys lost more than a daughter. They lost the belief that justice would come, because when systems fail, it isn't just the victim who disappears. It's everything they ever could have been. It's been over 25 years since Amy Lynn Bradley vanished, and yet her name refuses to disappear. She's not just a file in a drawer or a face on a missing poster. She is a question that won't go away. Even now, people come forward with stories. In Aruba, in Barbados, in Curaçao, they claim they've seen a woman, confused, scared, sometimes alone, sometimes guarded, who looks too much like Amy for it to be coincidence. Some say she speaks English with an American accent. Some say she keeps her distance but watches the world with eyes that seem to be screaming. Others describe tattoos matching the ones Amy had, on a woman who won't give her real name. Are these sightings real? Are they echoes of a ghost everyone wants to find? Or is Amy truly out there, alive, but trapped in a life that was forced upon her? If she is alive, then every moment that passes is a moment stolen. Every day is another thread unraveling the life she was meant to live. Her family still holds on, tired, scarred, but not broken. They cling to the idea that somewhere, somehow, Amy might be waiting for someone to find her, to listen, to see her. Because if she is alive, then she is not just a victim, she is a survivor, a woman who's endured the unspeakable, and who may still be holding on to one final hope, that someone somewhere hasn't stopped looking. So, where is Amy Lynn Bradley? That question still echoes across oceans, across borders, across time. And until it's answered, the silence that surrounds her story will never feel like peace. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe, and join us at Chronicles Confidential as we continue the search for truth the world tried to bury. Amy's story is not just about a missing girl. It's about a system where money silences truth, where power shields the guilty, and where justice is often the first thing to vanish. It's about governments that shrug, corporations that hide, and strangers in the dark who never leave fingerprints. It's about a mother who dreams of her daughter's voice, only to wake up to silence. When institutions fail and humanity looks away, what remains is a hollow space where a life should have been. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe, and continue the journey with Chronicles Confidential, where the truth isn't forgotten, even when the world pretends it never existed.